All right, welcome everyone to had a couple of weeks off here, back to our Native Strong bi-weekly town hall on the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we kind of crossing our fingers here, knock on wood, whatever you want to do, maybe getting to the end of this pandemic here, we are thinking of ways that we can kind of continue to use this forum to benefit our community. So we will kind of be transitioning and adding kind of pieces here and there, discussing other topical healthcare topics as we move forward here. So as always, we welcome you. If you've been here before, we welcome questions. The little chat bubble at the bottom, you can drop your questions in there. If you're joining us via Facebook, please just drop in a comment there, and we'll be moderating those as we go through. As is on a weekly basis, our good friend Mark Denning is here with us today, helping us out. So I'm going to pass it along to him, and thank you all for joining us.
Buju, Naroe Benezi, Indigenous Name Dodem, Anishinaabe and Dow, Neopit and Donjaba. Neopit, Wisconsin is where I am from, Menominee Reservation. My signal's coming to you from the Milwaukee area. And a good, happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. I'm showing you my Marquette University. You got two grads on the line here from MU, and they will be playing a national title. It may be the only day we get to say that, but we're going to say it, and that's really exciting for Marquette and the city of Milwaukee, where the majority of American Indians live in the state of Wisconsin. And that'll lead to my question, because we have a short session today, relatives, of just a half an hour here in Milwaukee. We're hosting the NCAA tournament. It is St. Patrick's Day. That means a lot of crowds, a lot of people coming together. And for some folks, the behavior for the last month or month and a half has been, hey, this is over. I got nothing to worry about. They're coming home to maybe someone who's going through cancer treatments or something that has to do with their body and makes them immunocompromised. Sorry about that. And somehow it's like, no, we're just going to continue with life as normal. But as we can see in news from other relations in China, it's quite serious, even the milder forms in it as it's going through. So we're glad you're here. There's just a few of us right now, but we know a lot of people check us out on tape. So for those of you here, please remember, if you have a comment or question, please do that in the chat box. And towards the end, we'll get to those questions. And again, to not belabor the point, we got about a half hour with you today. We're going to be signing off at 3:30, but it's an important discussion. So Dr. Ignace, if you could guide us through these last moments, especially here in Milwaukee. We have crowds coming from all over the United States, and it's a different environment. So here we go. Dr. Ignace.
Thanks, guys, and welcome back. And as Mark was saying, and Jeremiah, are we getting close to the end here? And it's quite possible we are. There are some caveats to this right now, and I want to make sure we go over them, because it's going to be important as we move through the next several weeks, at least for the rest of the month of March. And so, I wanted to bring this slide up because it's important, because these are going to be terms that are going to be thrown out here pretty soon about where we are in terms of status. So we have terms like endemic, epidemic, pandemic. Obviously, we're in that pandemic. But what does it mean to be endemic and an epidemic? So in an endemic, we know that we are transmission occurs, infections do occur, but the number of cases remain relatively constant. And what that means is that, yes, there are cases that will pop up, but they're not as dynamic as they have been with all of the outbreaks that we've seen, like in the pandemic. When Delta came in, clearly that was another variant that continued this pandemic. There was an obvious increase in the number of cases. So we can transition from endemic, epidemic, pandemic, and we go from endemic to epidemic. That's where the number of cases increases. Now, this could be, the number of cases could increase from season to season. It could increase from time to time. But obviously there's an outbreak and a spike of cases now, and it tends to be more centrally located, kind of like the Ebola virus. Endemic being more, like maybe the seasonal flu, and then it can transition to an epidemic. But once it starts going worldwide and the cases just explode, as we've seen here with COVID, but also even like the Spanish flu, that was a pandemic. There's been other pandemics over the history, and there's been at least six or seven pandemics that have occurred. So this is the latest one that has impacted all of us greatly to what we know right now. And I wanted to come up and tell you about the flu. Now, this is a bit weird because we are March, and typically the cold and flu season runs from October to March. So this is the profile of vaccinations that have occurred in the state of Wisconsin. They're color-coded by year, so you can kind of trend this out and see how this has gone. Now, we all heard about the impact of this past cold and flu season with Delta, and how horrific the flu was going to be. And so to the far right is the profile of vaccinations that have occurred. So if you go by like the dark, now I guess the light brown color, you can see by age group. You can see by age group, and the number, I guess the rate of vaccination by age group over the past compared to other years. Blue, that was, I guess, the first winter season of COVID. And obviously there was a huge, there was an uptick in vaccinations, getting this was before the COVID vaccines came out. So it was important to maintain the prevention of flu. And this past year, that number has gone down, and it's gone down across all age groups. Now, why this is important is because, well, we're almost done with the flu season, and as a provider myself, I really hadn't seen that many cases. Now, last year I hardly saw any cases, and that flu season showed to be quite low compared to previous years. This year, I think I saw one case of the flu, but when we start looking at numbers and looking at comparisons, looking at last year, numbers have just come out, and last year's the number of flu cases was 31,000. Now that's nothing compared to what it has historically in the past, and what's even more dramatic now, now that the season is almost over, it's just a little over 7,100 cases of the flu have been diagnosed. So it's certainly less than last year, which was low, and the past 2 years have been dramatically low. Now, what's fortunate for all of us, given that the flu vaccine has been available and has been given, is I just found out the effectiveness of the vaccine. And I think when we start looking and considering vaccinations as we have been, and effectiveness, and so the latest number I heard on this last year's vaccine effectiveness was 16%. 16%, that's low, and tell you the truth, that isn't too far from kind of the historical norms of what's been going on. But and I'm sure there'll be studies and papers written about why that is, but 16% is pretty low. So the reason why I bring this up is as we look forward to what's going on, certainly with BA2, Omicron BA2, the sublineage, and so it's important because what we're seeing right now is kind of a shift in numbers, not dramatically, but given where we are here in the United States compared to, let's say, overseas in Europe, the numbers are starting to have a little bit of a shift. And the reason why that may be is because of the sublineage of BA2 is starting to pop up, and it's starting to become the most predominant version of Omicron. Now, I presented this a couple of weeks ago, and this is what the case, the profile of Omicron was. So it was the original B11529 as being the original. Then BA1.1 showed up, and then BA2 started to show up. So this was a couple weeks ago. Now, what has changed is this. So the numbers I wrote in there on the left was what it was a couple weeks ago to what I have underlined to where it is now. So the original B11529 has gone from 21% in surveillance down to almost 11. The BA1.1 went from 75 down to 66.1. What's increasing is BA2. Now, does that necessarily mean we're going to have another wave of COVID? And right now, obviously BA2 is increasing in its rate and prevalence in our genomic surveillance. I would argue that more than likely will not be the case. Now, the reason being is because over the last couple of weeks, the trend in Europe has been to go slightly up. So we're seeing cases like in Germany and in the UK, where the numbers are actually trending up, and they're attributing that to the BA2. Now, here in the United States, we see that the states with the highest number of cases over the last 7 days is Washington, Illinois, California, and Texas, as well as North Carolina. Now, you'd say, well, that doesn't sound too good, but when you look at the numbers of what they actually are, we see that California has 29,000 cases. Texas 27, North Carolina 9,000, Illinois 8,000, Washington 8,700. When we look at it in comparison to what that is compared to what it was even a month ago, these numbers are dramatically down. These are dramatically down. Even when we go down to, let's say, Wisconsin here, where it's just under 2,800 cases in the last 77 days, that's to us, we would look at that number and say, hey, that's hardly anything. And you're mostly right, because generally across the board throughout the entire US, every state's numbers have gone down. And the caveat, and I'll give that caveat here in a minute, but another way to look at this is what's going on with hospitalizations. That would be kind of a delayed metric here of what the prevalence and how it's impacting communities is looking at hospitalization. So when we look at this metric, and this is the CDC reporting out on the prevalence, the trends are going down. The trends are going down. 28.4% change over the prior 7-day average, and almost an 86% decrease since the peak of Omicron. Now, I wanted to use this as an kind of an important point, because as the numbers are decreasing, if we look at what would be comparable, or what would be comparable to significance most recently, would be Delta. And so when we look at Delta and we look at the line of where we are now compared to where we were with the beginning of Delta, we're at that pre-Delta level and the trends are going down. So if you remember last summer, certainly around July 4th, believe it or not, we were having cases like in the double digits, and rarely would we see any triple digit numbers like over 100. Most of those numbers were 20, and I think we even had a couple of days of zero infection. So, and that was before Delta even showed up. So now we're definitely trending in that direction. So is BA2 actually impacting COVID right now? And looking at this particular metric, and looking at the trend of the number of cases over the last 7 days by states, you would think that the trend is going to continue to go down. And so maybe we know that BA2 is more transmissible than Omicron, but intrinsically it may not be any more infectious or deadly compared to what we're seeing with the original Omicron. So again, there is a caveat here. Now, the rate of vaccinations here in the state really has plateaued. The influx of new vaccines have not really dramatically changed over the last several weeks, maybe 0.1%, but nothing dramatic. And it seems like we're pretty much locked in right now with just minimal increases by age group. Now, an important thing one of these important impacts that I like to tell everyone, and certainly what the Native community has experienced. Now, this is a slide on the number of, or the rate of fatality, the fatality rate here in Milwaukee County as it relates to race and ethnicity. And again, I'm happy to say that the Native population has had no deaths in the last 90 days. Now, every time I give this presentation, I highlight this, but now we're going way beyond 90 days. We're going close to about 5 months, close to 6 months, where there's been no fatalities, Native fatalities in Milwaukee County. In terms of vaccination rates, the Native population has the highest vaccination rate in Milwaukee County compared to all other races and ethnicities at 79% who've received at least one shot and 71% who have completed their series. So that is in stark comparison to other ethnicities here in Milwaukee County. And I think that has a direct correlation into the fatality rates that we see now. So this is important to know. And as we look at what's occurring throughout the entire state, we see that the Native population is kind of that third, has the third highest rate in the state of Wisconsin, and that's important to know. Now, certain regions, certain areas, reservations may have different vaccination rates. So it's important to realize that despite Native people living in rural and urban settings, that this is a good rate, and I think when we start looking at what has occurred here in Milwaukee County, I think we have something to do with this rate of vaccination for the state of Wisconsin. What's going on in Milwaukee County, especially around hospitalization trends, new cases, they're going down. The percent positivity over the last 7 days has now gone to 2.4%. That's pretty significant. And again, we're kind of looking at that pre-Delta summertime time frame where we're going into these summer months. More people are going to be outside and more activities. But looking at how this is starting to play out, we could be heading into a very open and free summer pretty soon. Vaccination rates, again, nationally have not changed. 65% total population, almost 89% of 65 and older, which has not dramatically changed a whole lot. when we start looking at what's going on in the native population. So in the 3 states, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, what I have underlined is the trend, the average over the last several weeks. So if we look at the third underline, let's say the Michigan 94, 2 weeks ago it was 46, now it's 41 cases. Minnesota dramatically decreasing from 288 to now 42. Here in Wisconsin, 139 to 27 new cases. Again, we're talking about the summertime of last year numbers, and certainly at a level of that pre-Delta timeframe. So when we look at, so here's the caveat: trends are going down, hospitalizations are going down, case rates are going down across every state here in America. Now the caveat here, and this is why I'm a little not absolute, but the caveat here is the trend over the last several days has remained flat. It's not dramatically going down. It's still triple digits. Like in this past week, it's all been in the 400s. Now, if this virus was truly moving itself out, you would see these numbers continually going down with each passing day, and that's not the case. What is happening is the number of cases have remained flat, and that's the caveat and a little concerning, because is this still the introduction of BA2 in our communities that's still letting COVID linger on? And that could very well be the case of what we're seeing. And the only thing that would change is as obviously the trend starts going up. But right now it has remained flat, and the numbers are in the 400s for the last 3 days. So that's where the caveat is. In terms of case rates, natives have had the second highest case rates, second in hospitalization, and the highest fatality rate here in Wisconsin. Looking at numbers. So when we look at numbers, we see that the 30-year-old age group is still the #1 age group that has the highest number of cases of COVID. In terms of hospitalizations, we're seeing 60, 70, 80-year-old age groups still have the highest number of cases, as well as the highest number of fatalities. Now, what's interesting here is the ICU admissions. These are numbers over the past 7 days. So there's been 3 ICU admissions in the last 7 days. And looking at that compared to where we were even 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, this is dramatically has gone down. So as ICU numbers drop, we would like to see the number of fatalities decrease at the same time, as well as the hospitalization rate that's been going down, and then the number of cases will follow. So again, trends are going down. The caveat is it is flat in terms of number of new cases every day. And is this because of BA2? And it quite could very well be BA2. Now, what we may be getting into is a phase where, even though BA2 is maybe more transmissible than even what Omicron was, for it to have a new spike, that's where I would be more concerned that we're not out of this. But all indications certainly indicate that we are, and there still needs to be a level of protection and prevention that goes around. And as of right now, I think the next 2 weeks will tell us a heck of a lot of where we're going, especially heading out of spring break and going into the summer months. So with that, Jeremiah and Mark, I said I wanted to do 30 minutes, and so keeping us on time.
So looking at it, Jeremiah, got my regular shirt on now, for the weather. You do have a good question in here, and that's a concern folks have vaccines. And that's the one question I got last week from someone, native person. So I'll do mine first. And that is, now that it seems like things are over, there's 3 powwows, you know, for folks to go to this weekend here in Wisconsin. Awesome. But their question is, they hadn't gotten vaccinated, and why should they not? You know, it seemed like, all right, you know, what's the answer to that one? So Dr. Ignace will just hand that off to you, and that builds to probably our last question for the session, Jeremiah, and you can bring that one to the fore. So Dr. Ignace, if someone hasn't gotten vaccinated, why do it now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good question, and it's a fair one too. Certainly given the number and the rates of infections that are going down. You know, I have individuals that have not gotten vaccinated. They haven't gotten COVID and they haven't gotten vaccinated. So every time I ask, at least in the last couple months, if they want to be vaccinated, they kind of chuckle and say, well, look at where we are now. Well, that's true. And the only point I would make is that getting vaccinated would certainly help reduce your chances of developing a severe illness that would land you in the hospital. And that, you know, we know that there are breakthrough infections. We know that the vaccine is temporary. And there is still good indication that it does prevent severe illness as well as hospitalization. So there is, you know, there is some utility to still getting the vaccine. And I certainly understand the point where, you know, it's, look where we are, we're almost done, why should I get it? I understand that. And your risk of contracting may actually go down because it's less, it's becoming less and less common factor in the community that you reside in. So now what's going to be different and what may change that is that just as Mark had mentioned, that powwows, community events, sporting events here at the Pfizer Forum, I mean, we are getting close to really opening the doors wide open here. But just realize that there are still cases floating around. And certainly with spring break that's going on, we could very well see a small spike. The question is that going to be you? It's hard to say. But I would say it is still worthwhile to get that vaccine.
Jeremiah, we'll go over to you for the last question. Not seeing another.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. So somebody on Facebook jumped in and had a question regarding, and you know, I think it's funny. I think we talked about this, me and you, face to face earlier in the week, and regarding vaccines themselves. So the vaccine for seasonal flu is reformulated every year because, as we know, flu, much like COVID-19, is constantly evolving, new strains, etc. So why are the, you know, COVID vaccines continuing to be the same vaccine or booster for COVID despite its variants? And why, or do you see this possibly being, you know, something that's reformulated every year like the flu vaccine instead of kind of getting the same shot?
No, I agree, and it's a good point that the individual had written out. So I think we're at a point now where we realize that with every variant that does come up, that the variations to the vaccines that we have now are going to keep changing and making what we currently have in terms of vaccines less effective. So what does that mean? What that means is this next generation or next go around of prevention, these vaccines have to change. And the hard part, and just like with the flu, is that you are kind of estimating now what the flu is going to be like 12 months from now. And that's the hard part. But I will say, given our new technology that we found with this pandemic, the mRNA technology, let's say we have this great pause between now and let's say new cases start coming up. Well, as soon as those new cases start popping up, vaccines, mRNA, could be quickly developed and be available probably within about 3 or 4 months. That's how fast this technology has now become. In that regard, we can kind of sit and wait and say, hey, is this going to happen again? If we do, we could probably pounce on it fairly quickly with the mRNA technology. With that being said, there is certainly this current vaccine now will not be effective next year. I can almost guarantee it will not. So there's a need for this second generation of vaccine, and I know I've talked about this a couple times. And when we look at this particular virus and all of its protein antigens that could be developed, I mean, when we get infected with the coronavirus, our bodies develop antibodies not just to the spike protein, but all of the proteins that make the coronavirus what it is, its unique makeup, genetic makeup. So that ability for us to develop all of these antibodies to all of these 20 plus proteins, that type of vaccine is going to be a heck of a lot more effective than developing a vaccine just to one protein like the spike protein. So I would hope that this next generation of vaccine has that multi-point variant ability. So if we do get it, that we get exposed to multiple proteins that don't change, that don't become the super variants that we've seen. They could change, but we have the genetic markers to develop antibodies against multiple different aspects of the coronavirus that don't change, that don't mutate. And so that's the type of vaccine I would like to see come up. And so, so yeah, I understand, why are we taking the same vaccine as a booster? And the answer is, I would agree. I don't know why we are doing this. I know Moderna and Pfizer just came out saying, hey, boosters, fourth round boosters for people 65 and older. Well, is that because they need the same vaccine over and over again, or is it because they're going to get a better, stronger response? Probably not, but it does provide a very short-term effectiveness. And I think maybe why they're doing this is to kind of bridge the gap between now until we actually do get over the hump here and get past COVID. So I understand the rationale for a fourth booster. However, I think individuals that are 65 and younger, or individuals who are in good health, don't necessarily need that fourth booster or a booster right now. So.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ignace. Like you said, we're going to keep this short today. I just want to remind people that, as we move forward, we will be kind of, possibly changing the topics a little bit from COVID as we move forward. So check your emails, check our Facebook page. And so we'll keep you up to date on which direction we're going to take this. And of course, Dr. Ignace, as always, I'll leave you with the last word today. Thank you.
Yeah, and just like Jeremiah mentioned, so I'm going to be spending less of this time that we have together on COVID, unless something dramatically comes up. But transitioning to what is the impact of COVID, both the short-term, long-term on the Native community, what we're seeing, what we're experiencing, and really start looking at how we can talk about and address the health disparities that affect Indian communities, in particular here in Wisconsin. So we're going to be kind of dynamically shifting here, but the topics will always be around health and how we can help address, how we can talk through this and help each other improve the health of our Native community. So I'll say go Marquette. Do great this in the NCAA tournament, and hopefully we'll see them in the Final Four. Till next time, everybody, I'll see you. Have a good weekend.